Welcome back to a Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. The conversation about whether or not military officers should follow unlawful orders continues, with a new voice being added to the mix, and it's not someone you might guess. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, said that military officers are required not to carry out unlawful orders. This seems like a bit of an unusual stance to take, considering who she is and who she works for, until you realize this is a statement she made back in 2024 and has no connection to the current discussion about the President and the Department of Defense issuing orders for extrajudicial killings that could be considered war crimes. This was actually back in March of last year as part of a brief she filed as a lawyer for the America First Policy Institute. Yes, she did say that the military would not carry out a potentially unlawful order from the president to kill non-military targets, and that indeed service members are required not to do so. She was actually saying that to defend her orange boss, who had at the time been petitioning the Supreme Court to get him immunity from prosecution from charges relating to him attempting to invalidate the 2020 election, which he had lost. In an appeals court argument a couple months previously, one of Trump's lawyers had been asked, could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to a criminal prosecution? To which Trump's personal lawyer said no. And that was a problem, because that sounded really bad. So Pam Bondi felt she had to follow up with that in a brief to say, wait, no. That hypothetical is so unrealistic because military officers would never comply with that order anyway. Now in late 2025, it doesn't seem so unrealistic after all. And now that she's not just a lawyer for a conservative think tank, but it's actually the Attorney General, one whose position is based almost entirely in unwavering and complete loyalty to this criminal president, would she still stand by that? Or was she only against it when it was a complete hypothetical and not something that her boss would obviously not only actually do, but already actually did? The Department of Defense's own Law of War manual states very clearly that you cannot fire on shipwrecked persons because it would be a war crime, and it was an order that must be disobeyed. But we all know how much good words on a page did those Venezuelans on those boats. Pam Bondi, and I think a lot of her fellow conservatives, are really only against the idea of military officers not following a clearly unlawful order issued by the president when it was purely a hypothetical, something that they said would never actually happen. So you can't even really ask about it, but are strangely silent when that hypothetical becomes our lived reality, and they actually have to confront the reality that their president did in fact issue unlawful orders, which were then complied with by those military officers. But I think the central question isn't should military officers comply with orders that are unlawful. The law is incredibly clear on the fact that they should not. But is it that if the president issues it, is it still unlawful? At this point, it really seems like that's the only way to get around it. It's why pointing out that the military officers have a responsibility not to follow unlawful orders issued by a president can be framed as sedition, because it's implying that there could be a possibility where the president issued something that was blatantly illegal, mostly because it was. That Trump lawyer back in 2024 was just saying the quiet part out loud. In their minds, Donald Trump should be able to order the murder of his political enemies and suffer no political consequences. Full stop. But understandably and very accurately, that sounds like a villainous dictator, not an American president. So because we have a president and an administration that is entirely obsessed with optics and how things look, it's all about spin. They can't lean on a president would never issue that sort of order. So the military wouldn't have to comply with it because it would never be issued in the first place. If the president ordered it, then clearly it must not have been illegal. And the fact that you're even implying that it would be illegal is the problem. This administration is ignoring the law in real time because they seem to believe that there will be no consequence for it. And while in the short term that absolutely seems to be the case, especially with the Supreme Court essentially saying, well, Donald Trump can do whatever he wants, it's fine. In the long term, they're not coming out of this unscathed. History will remember this as it is, not as they want to portray it. The reality that a criminal president has been doing criminal actions, and while only the future can tell us whether or not the man himself will suffer actual consequences as a result, history will show that the law doesn't only apply if you're the president with a D next to your name. A history of crime and ignoring the law is the only legacy Donald Trump can look forward to. Reminding military members that they are not required to follow illegal and unlawful orders is not sedition, it's the facts, it's reality. So if you're the one pushing against it, that seems to pretty firmly, at least in my eyes, plant you on the side that's wrong. Issuing an airstrike on 2 shipwrecked men to kill them after you already blew up the boat they were on is just murder, plain and simple. The war on drugs isn't an actual declared war, so he can't just kill whoever he wants in the name of winning the war on drugs. And ultimately, that's how people are going to see it, because that's the reality. And history has shown us that we were just following orders isn't a defense that gets one very far. As we as a nation seem to slide farther and farther into authoritarianism and even fascism, it becomes more and more important to not deny the truth of our eyes, what we see, and remember that a crime is a crime no matter how wrapped in a flag you put it. I'm sure if Attorney General Pam Bondi was confronted with the statements made by simply lawyer Pam Bondi back in 2024, she would not stand by those statements, because she would say that it's completely different. The situation isn't a hypothetical, so you really can't hold me to what I said back then. Though admittedly that itself is a hypothetical, because they probably wouldn't bother to ask her about those statements, because she would always have some sort of way of justifying it. Her boss, President Trump, very clearly can do no wrong in the eyes of those high up in the administration, or at least that's what they have to say publicly, because as soon as that loyalty is tested, they risk just being removed and replaced with someone whose loyalty cannot be tested. But I also think that speaks to a much bigger issue, which is that so much of this government that it's supposed to work for the people, for the American people, work directly for this president and his personal interests. He's turned something like the FBI, that's supposed to be about law enforcement and meant to protect all American people, into the President Donald Trump Protection Agency that spends overtime erasing Donald Trump's name from the Epstein files. If the American people had any real hope in our institutions, he's made sure that we have lost them entirely. The FBI doesn't work for the president. The Department of Justice does not work for the president. None of these government agencies are supposed to be directly answerable to the President of the United States and no one else. But the world we're living in normalizes the fact that they essentially do, to the point where we have law enforcement agencies who are supposed to exist to enforce the law, protecting a president that is constantly breaking the law. And I'm really not saying how we can trust in them again if we can see how easily they're able to just fall in line with the leader that is obviously doing wrong. We shouldn't be asking what happens if the military execute an unlawful order. It should be, once they have, what comes next? And does the loyalty to this president run so deep that the answer is nothing? That if this president issues an unlawful order and it is executed, that there is no consequence, because if the president issued it, it must not have been unlawful? Or are they going to go so far as to redefine what crime is so that the president isn't committing a crime? It certainly feels like it. I keep asking myself, where is the line with this administration? But it seems clearer and clearer that there is no line for them. There is nothing that they will not justify or obfuscate or redefine, so that the rules and norms that we've all collectively agreed to simply do not apply to him. They only apply to other people, to other administrations, but not to this one, not to this man. And that feels like a very disheartening place to be as a country and as a people. We deserve to be able to have faith in our elected leaders, in our presidents, in our government agencies. And right now we don't have any of that, because those entities have shown us that they are not worthy of our belief, of our respect, of our faith. And building that back up is going to be an uphill battle. It's going to be a real struggle. And in a lot of ways, I don't know how they're going to pull it off. But it is important to remember that these times that we're in right now are not forever. Yes, sadly, our nation will have the scars that it's leaving for some time. But things will get better. We will be better and be able to look back at these dark times and really see how far we've come. It feels like almost a fantasy at the moment. I have full faith that that will be our lived reality in time. We just have to get through the now to get to that future. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time when I cut you off another slice of news.